Hooray. Hi, everybody. I grew up in a family of 5 kids. And there's some photos of us there. That's me. That's the fam. With so many kids come so many messes, and we had a chore schedule. Of all the chores, kitchen cleaning filled me with a deep, simmering rage. Always. Rage at things that were a bit too stuck. Maybe at our big dining room table that took so many zillions of wipes to get clean. See, I'm triggered already. Most of all, I raged at the cursed linoleum floor. It was faux tile, and it was so bumpy. And then we had this dustpan and broom situation. You might know what I'm talking about, where the rubber on the dustpan is like 1.5 millimeters high, probably thanks to some half-asleep engineer in a factory somewhere. And it's like just high enough that this line of dirt gets stuck on the lip. And so you crouch down. Everything's perfectly lined up for the shot. You have your dustpan, your broom. 10, 20 swipes. There's a line. So what do? You turn it the other way. You try to, 25, 76 swipes. And there's still this line of dirt. Anyone else feel a sense of rage growing in them right now? My ongoing relationship with cleaning is what I like to call a sanctification opportunity. But I had this great hack when I was a kid. The bathroom is a sacred place. It's like one of those biblical cities of refuge, if you've read Joshua. And it had multiple Uncle John's bathroom readers. This was before smartphones were allowed in my house. And who can judge how long a bathroom break must take? I had enough bathroom readers to wait out an apocalypse. So that's what I did for a while, and eventually my siblings and my parents started catching on that whenever it was my turn to do dishes, I suddenly had to use the bathroom. And the hack here is that if you keep fake having to go to the bathroom long enough, eventually you actually do, and you build this routine in your life where every time you finish a meal... Sorry, not trying to give anyone ideas, but... They bug me about it to this day. Like anytime we're back at a family gathering and we finish a meal, one of my siblings is like, "Oh, you have to go to the bathroom now." So hilarious. Classic. Well, growing up, I tended to be what some might call lazy. I prefer the term diligence challenged. If we haven't met yet, my name is Robert. I'm one of the pastors here at Summit Drive. And today we're continuing our series on the book of Proverbs, focusing on the topic of diligence. So if you got your Bibles, I'll invite you to turn to Proverbs 6 through 11. That's going to be our main text that we come back to today. So let's read this together. "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in the summer and gathers its food in the harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." Is it just me, or does this sound like something from a roast battle? I hear, "Go to the ant, you sluggard," and I expect a Shakespearean entourage to go "Ooh, thou hast been roasted." It's what the kids call a hot slam. I don't know if anyone calls it that, but I just did. A lot of conversations around laziness can feel a little bit heavy in the shame department. Check out this depiction of the sin of sloth from a medieval Christian allegory called Piers Plowman. "Then sloth came forward, filthy from head to foot, with a pair of oozing eyes. I've got to sit down, the fellow said, or else I'll drop off where I stand. If I got into my bed, I tell you I wouldn't stir before I was ready to eat, except to relieve my bowels. Belching, he got out the words, bless me. Thumping his bosom hard, then stretched, gave a prodigious yawn, and soon was snoring soundly. And then like a paragraph later in the book, we find out that the sloth is a priest. Ouchies. I think for some of us, stereotypes like this have made it tough to engage with the topic of laziness and diligence. Like if images like this pop into your head when you hear the word lazy, we might want to deny associating with laziness or maybe feel beat down by shame. We should recognize that sluggard is not meant to depict a specific person. One of the features of Proverbs is that it personifies patterns of living that exist in every one of us. The word isn't meant to single us out as much as it's meant to caution us from destructive patterns that we might tend to follow. Historically, Christians have spent a lot of time talking and thinking about laziness. We just read this old-timey description of the sin of sloth. And sloth and laziness are similar in meaning, but where we might think of laziness as like inaction or unproductivity or excessive napping maybe, the way that Christians have talked about sloth is in our relationship with love. In her book, Glittering Vices, philosophy professor Rebecca DeYoung defines sloth as resistance to the demands of love. She points to a long history of theologians wrestling with the sin of sloth and states, sloth has more to do with being lazy about love than lazy about our work. Like, huh? Lazy about love? Isn't that like a little dramatic? The biblical and historical conversation about laziness have this to say, that your efforts or lack thereof always affect the people around you. If we do a cursory reading of Proverbs, you might notice that farm life is the assumed norm for the book's audience. And in ancient Israel, before industrialized farming, farming required a lot of hands. Most Israelites were part of a social unit called a bet av, literally just house of the father. And in this social structure, a patriarch would live on a piece of property along with his descendants. If he had adult sons, they would live in a house right next to his along with their families. And archaeologists estimate that the population of one of these pieces of property was like 50 to 100 people, including poor working families. That's a real-life depiction of a bet of and the family that lived on it, I'm sure. This means that work was usually a family affair. Like your alarm clock was the sun, and sleeping or slacking off meant, at best, more work for everyone else. At worst, it meant people going hungry. And if you were living in ancient Israel, laziness caused real damage. Not just for you, but to everyone around you. It was fundamentally unloving. And if we read Proverbs in its historical context, I think there's actually a lot of consistency between biblical laziness and the sin of sloth as a resistance to the demands of love. Like if we look in Proverbs 21, verses 25 and 26. The craving of a sluggard will be the death of him, because his hands refuse to work. All day long he craves for more, but the righteous give without sparing. You see that the sluggard consumes, the righteous gives. Or we could look at Proverbs 10:26. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so are sluggards to those who send them. Vinegar and smoke. There are two things that make us say, get that out of my face. Good reference. Laziness always affects other people. and it causes real damage. So what does laziness look like, and how do we avoid it? Well, part of what makes laziness work is that it often consists of doing technically good things. If we look at our passage in Proverbs 6, verse 9 says, "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" And we might be thinking, like, isn't sleep good? Isn't there this whole thing about sleep hygiene? Yeah, for sure. Sleep is very good. But the main concern is timing. Laziness can mean doing good things at bad times. And if we aren't meeting our core duties and responsibilities, even good things like work or activities or social outings can function as laziness in our lives. Checking work emails instead of connecting with your spouse at a date. Good thing, bad timing. Going to the bathroom instead of doing dishes. Good thing, bad timing. Laziness doesn't often look like doing nothing at all. And for many of us in the Western world, it often looks like putting a lot of time and effort into the wrong things. It's ignoring our foundational sacred responsibilities. For many of us, laziness can look like working hard to please our bosses or strangers on the internet while neglecting the families and communities that we've been called to love. Sleep is also just a good depiction of what laziness feels like. It feels like nodding off at the wheel or losing touch with your life and responsibilities. And the path to laziness is often incremental. Let's look again at our passage, verse 10. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Notice this repetition of little. It's like sitting in a comfy chair. I'll just sit for a minute. And there's this little button for a recline thing. I'll just play with that for a hot second. Ooh, comfy. And then I'll just close my eyes for a quick second. Repeated Z's in a speech balloon. You know the comics. I'm not knocking a good surprise nap. Like, there are a few better things when you've got nothing else to do. But this is what our behavior is like when we neglect the demands of love in our life. Baby steps, procrastination. It's the I'll get to it later-ing that a lot of us do. And especially when we're like anxious or afraid of some big daunting task, opening a spooky can of worms. And sometimes our brain is moving so fast, like we barely even notice it. Like you start to think about doing the dishes, and then you start to think about, well, the dishwasher is clean, but I haven't emptied it yet, so I'll have to do that first. And then, the dish soap dispenser is empty, and I'll have to fill that too. And then I have a pan here that is a little bit crusty, and I need to soak it for a little bit. But I don't have any room on my counter because I need to put dishes in the dishwasher. My dishwasher is full because I haven't emptied it. Not based on real-life experience. And then, as if by magic, you notice, there's my TV. There's a new season of Love is Blind UK. You love their funny little British accents, their weird slang. And you start to wonder, is love still blind, even for the sophisticated British people? So you watch an episode, because there are no dishes in the pods. And the episode ends on a cliffhanger. There's a love triangle. Will Kieran decide between Megan and Sophie? What will happen when they get out of the pods? Life is so much simpler in the pods. Classic Love is Blind. I assume. I've never watched it, so I don't know. But just one more. That's how life works. To live the way of the fool in Proverbs means picking from the bottom shelf every time. Slight and easy deviations from the path here and there, and they build up, they accumulate. I love the very beginning of Psalm 1. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers." There's such punchy wisdom in this verse. Notice walk, stand, sit. It's this gradual, step by step, hard to notice movement. It's concise poetry that points to the nature of stepping away from the good path, step by step. And the incremental pull of laziness has this weird relationship with our thought patterns. I find Proverbs 26:16 interesting. It says, "A sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 people who answer discreetly." Creative and thoughtful individual, most people with really active brains, have to take caution. The pull of laziness is tempting. It looks at our lives and it notices that there is tough stuff to do. And then it gets to work on coming up with the easiest possible path. And as Ricky talked about at the beginning of our series on Proverbs, biblical wisdom doesn't usually play well with life hacks. It's often calling us to lean into the hard thing, calling us to notice that the better way usually takes a bit more effort. But our brains are excuse factories. One of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 22:13. The sluggard says, "There is a lion outside. I'll be killed in the public square." And scholar Robert Alter points out that the Hebrew phrase is literally, "I shall be murdered." It's meant to be a bit of a silly image. Yes, there are lions somewhere. Good observation. Yes, lions kill people. Another good observation. But it's a creative leap to jump from the mere existence of lions to a serial killer lion hunting you and only you. And therefore, it's nap time. It's telling your boss, "I can't come into work today. There are cars. I will be killed." All the pieces are there for a great excuse, and our brains are excuse factories. Rationalizing the lazy choice is kind of weird. It's sort of like your brain has a deep groove that gives preferential treatment to the decision that makes you do less work. Less work is appealing, really appealing. And combating laziness requires us to recognize a deeply ingrained easy is better bias that we all have. And part of becoming a diligent person means knowing when to bypass the excuse-making process. Sometimes we need to just close our eyes and dive into the difficult thing ahead of us. And there are times when your brain is not your friend. Hebrew laziness proverbs tend to use the conventional term atzel, or atzel, which is translated sluggard or lazy bones, depending on your conversation. Nice insult word. But they occasionally use the word remiah. And it's a word that typically means treacherous or deceitful, but it can also mean lazy. And for example, Proverbs 12:27, we see the lazy, the remiah, do not roast any game, but the diligent feed on the riches of the hunt. This overlap between deceit, like being a con man, and not getting your work done is kind of thought-provoking. It's a recognition, in a way, that laziness is destructive. And if we return to our passage and we look at verse 11, we see the conclusion of this section that tells us the fate of the sluggard. It says, "Poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." Now, I want to quickly note that Proverbs does not moralize poverty or wealth, strictly speaking. There are plenty of proverbs about poverty being a better choice than multiple situations. And then in places like Proverbs 13:23, we see that poverty is often caused by injustice and not laziness. But what our text is highlighting is that there are real and scary long-term consequences to inaction, and it sneaks up on you. All the way along, the lazy path has no alarm bells. But by the time we start to see the real consequences of our inaction, it's too late. Proverbs 24, 30, and 31 gives us this picture of how laziness makes life more difficult in the long term. I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered in weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. Thorns and ruins are such vivid imagery. Because not only has the sluggard lost his source of food, but now it's going to take so much extra and painful effort to get the farm back in working order. It's like my arch nemesis, the dishes. If you make a meal and you do the dishes immediately afterward, it can be annoying, because chores are just annoying. We don't have to lie to ourselves. So I have met some people who don't feel that way, and they're strange. But things don't get crusty if you do them right away. Food isn't like really sticking to the surfaces as hard as it is, but then you wait a day, maybe you wait more. When I was an RA in Briarcrest, I was surrounded by a bunch of young men who were learning to live without their moms. And there was a guy in my hall, I went into his room, and there was just this pile of cookie sheets and assorted spoons in his sink that had been sitting there for over a month. There was bits of like old taquitos and mashed potatoes caked into the spoons. And I apologize for the imagery. Trying to clean stuff like that is like trying to pry open a bear trap. Like everything is locked in place. And something that would have taken 2 minutes to clean a month ago is going to take hours in soaking and industrial strength cleaners and inhuman amounts of elbow grease. It's the great lie of laziness. It tells us life is hard, but there's a shortcut. It's the part of us that wonders, do I really need to do dishes? And it obscures the future pain that we're going to experience from our naive present selves. But the shortcuts that we take just multiply pain down the road. And procrastinators know there's no bigger jerk on the planet than you yesterday. The version of yourself that said, I'll get to it later. Thanks a lot. Now, before we move on to talk about diligence, I am aware that when we're talking about the topic of laziness and sloth and diligence and inaction, it can hit people differently. For me, laziness has tended to be a sensitive word because it has this connotation of an unwillingness to do work. But many people in many different circumstances wouldn't describe themselves as unwilling. They might describe themselves as unable. And for those who might have physical or mental disabilities, wrestling with chronic pain, limitations posed by anxiety or depression, or autism or ADHD, or even new parents or those with aging parents or those with disabled family members, like the line between unwilling and unable is complicated. The first thing I would say is that engaging with biblical wisdom literature, more than most other biblical genres, requires that we thoughtfully bring realistic versions of ourselves into the text. We tangle with it as ourselves. We find what's useful for our current situation, what's doable for us, and we move forward on the path of wisdom, whatever that looks like. In my own life, a doctor diagnosing and prescribing medication for my ADHD has been a gift It's enabled me to do a better job of taking care of my responsibilities at home and at work. It's also helped me get out of a lot of the shame cycles that I would experience growing up as I wrestled through problems with procrastination and laziness. And Dave and Ricky and people that I schedule on Planning Center should be thankful. Your life is better. I was chatting with Ricky about this topic, and he highlighted the parable of the talents that we find in Matthew 25. And in this parable, Jesus tells of 3 different people. Each person has a different amount of resource and abilities that they are bringing to the table. And the question that we're left with is not, how much have I accomplished? The question is, what have I done with what I've been given? So engaging with the topic of laziness and diligence calls us to know ourselves well and to have an accurate idea of what tools and capabilities we do and don't have. Cool. So, laziness, bad. But what is the opposite of laziness? Because if we aren't careful, we can make some dangerous assumptions. Let's look at 2 bad antonyms for laziness. Antonym means opposite. And, thanks, Bruce, for the ant pun. Much appreciated. The first bad antonym is busyness. Busyness sort of sounds like the opposite of laziness. It's a full schedule. You're always doing stuff, constantly driving from here to there, never sitting down. Maybe you're like always on your phone and unable to sit with your own thoughts. Busyness, in and of itself, slowly kills us. It actually makes us lazier people. It cultivates a sort of spiritual sloth, and it doesn't give us the space that we need to make thoughtful, slow, wise decisions in our lives. Hustle culture says that there's always more to get. Go 110% all day, every day, sleep 2 hours a night, take ice baths every 45 minutes. And it conflates diligence and busyness. But God gives his people rest. Like Israel, the same Israel that is writing all of these Proverbs has 1 day a week where they do absolutely nothing, absolutely no work, not allowed. And if you want to know more about Sabbath, check out Ricky's sermon from the fall. Everyone should check that one out, in my opinion. There are also like mandatory holidays, and then every 7 years, you take a whole year and you don't farm. And then every 50 years, you do that 2 years in a row. When God is setting up the schedule for his people, he gives them a lot of rest. And not like superficial binging Netflix rest. It's like genuine, turn your phone off, unplug kind of rest. And it's essential if you want to live a life of wisdom and diligence. A second bad antonym is productivity. It's really pervasive as a word for how to evaluate work in our culture. And it's even built into like our dominant metric for the success of a nation, like GDP, gross domestic product. And sometimes I've found myself using the words lazy and unproductive interchangeably. But for biblical wisdom, productivity is not automatically good. In her book, Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture, biblical scholar Ellen F. Davis states that the opposite of sloth is not work merely, but good work. And she points to Exodus 31, where God commissions the newly liberated Israel to build the tabernacle. It's good work, and it's going to continue the process of pulling Israel out of their previous life of slavery. But what do we see happen immediately afterward in Exodus 32? Israel builds a golden calf. It's an Egypt-style god in the image of their former masters. There are 2 types of work on display here. And check out Frick's sermon from a couple of weeks ago for a deeper dive into this topic as well. We need to ask, producing what? For whom? To what end? Because we can work hard and leave the world and our communities and our families worse off in the process. Monopolizing, deceitful sales practices, taking advantage of the poor, those can all be categorized as productive in certain corners of our culture. But diligence will never call us there. The word productivity is also too narrow in scope. And productivity doesn't care about your connection with your family, it doesn't care about your spiritual health. And you can be productive without being thoughtful, healthy, or loving. And if we're pursuing biblical wisdom, that's a huge problem. So, not busyness, not productivity. The word that we get consistently as an antonym for laziness is diligence. And if laziness does damage, diligence brings life. And a good working definition of diligence is love at work. And diligence is love at work. Let's look at Proverbs 6 again. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no ruler or overseer, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. The ant. Technically, it's my favorite animal. It's their weird social structure, their polymorphism. Sim Ant, the confusing 90s video game. Anybody? Mild nostalgia. Sometimes Sam sees an ant colony when he's on a walk, and then he texts me a picture. Much appreciated, Sam, wherever you are. So let's highlight 3 ways that we can think about ants, these little tiny animals, and see how they help us think about what diligence looks like. First, ants are small. They have limitations, like us. We're pretty small. Even the most hardworking, productive person you've ever met can't do it all. Being diligent starts with knowing your own limitations and capabilities. So we ask, what are my limitations? Being diligent requires a strong sense of self-awareness. And so pride, false humility, any warped sense of self, well, that's going to significantly obstruct our ability to love those around us well. For example, I have been realizing that I need extra limitations in place to help me put my phone down. So I have app timers, I have my screen on grayscale to make it look less exciting. I'm limited in my ability to say no to this thing in my pocket. And if I want to be diligent, I need to be aware of that. Second, ants are communal. They need each other. And like ants, we weren't created to be self-sufficient. So whether it's family, friends, medical assistance, or financial support, we need help to do life well. We ask, what are my needs? And when we don't accurately recognize and express our own needs, the people around us suffer. For some of us, the call of diligence is a call to be less independent. Third, ants are responsible. Each one has a job to do, and if they don't do that job, it just doesn't get done. That's the main point of the passage that we're looking at. Know what your responsibilities are. Take ownership. So we ask, what am I responsible for? And the answer is different for each of us. Like, a 5-year-old needs help brushing their teeth probably. Most 20-year-olds should have that figured out, hopefully, fingers crossed. 13-year-olds shouldn't be responsible for doing the family's taxes or renewing car insurance, but 13-year-olds can probably do dishes without taking hour-long bathroom breaks every mealtime. Just a random example. Looking back to the parable of the talents, the more resources that we have, the more people who are impacted by our actions, the more our sphere of responsibility grows. If you're a business owner, making sure that your employees get paid fairly and on time is a responsibility that you signed up for when you hired people. If you're a parent, you have responsibility to spend time with your kids. And say it's getting to the end of Friday afternoon, you've got like 41 emails to get through, you've been working evenings and weekends for the last 2 weeks. Some people will be annoyed if you don't answer your emails, but they're not life or death. And there's a limit to how many people you can keep happy at the same time. Diligence for you probably means annoying some people, shutting your laptop, and going home for the weekend. If we want to live a life of diligence, we can start by asking these 3 questions. What are my limitations? What are my needs? What am I responsible for? In the last section of Proverbs, chapter 31, we get this depiction of the wife of noble character. And it's a section that shows us the impact that diligence can have on those around us. It's strategically placed in the book because Proverbs begins with Lady Wisdom, the path of skillful living, calling out to us. And then it ends with a picture of how wise, diligent living brings blessing to everyone around us. And of course, even though we're talking about the diligent, the wife of normal character, these characteristics ultimately apply to anyone who is following the path of diligence. We read that the diligent woman brings good and not harm. The diligent woman provides food for her family. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. Diligence is love at work, and it's powerful. Where laziness destroys and impoverishes and sucks dry, and is fundamentally unloving, diligence gives, it builds, it strengthens, it blesses. If you want to love those around you well, pursue a life of diligence. Put your love into action. I'll invite the band to come back up. For those of us who have committed our lives to following Jesus, our path of discipleship actually calls us to diligent living. Like, who demonstrated love at work more than Jesus? He loved, he blessed those around him, he healed, he fed, he taught, he liberated. And Jesus wasn't busy. He wasn't frantic. He took time away to rest and pray when he needed to. He knew how to say no. And when he's wrestling with the grueling path of crucifixion in Gethsemane, he chooses us. And the whole world is blessed. The cross is the most concrete act of love in human history. It's the symbol of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Here's what Jesus says to us. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it.